And I will call the meeting of the Board of Supervisors to order at this time. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all new members as well as returning members to the County Board. And I think just for a brief period here, what I'll do is have all of us go around the room and on the Zoom. Just give us a brief background on you, maybe what you're about, and we'll go from there. Then we'll proceed on with the business. So I'm Dave Peterson, Board Chair, and I'm sitting off camera to enable further distancing if needed on the floor here. And I don't plan on having a lot to do with the meeting today, mostly listening. So I was on the board first in 2008, and then I returned after that term 2 years later after the redistricting, downsizing. I spent 40 years shy of a month or two as an air traffic controller in Farmington and a supervisor. And never thought I would be in government business, but I've enjoyed it immensely so far. Thank you. And go ahead, Scott.
Well, my name's Scott Coner. I've spent, I don't know, can you hear me okay with this thing? Okay. Civilian career-wise, got over 35 years as a general contractor in the New Richmond area, and about 25 years of that also as a land developer, doing some minor and major subdivisions. Also have 24 years in the Army National Guard, retiring as First Sergeant in the Menominee Unit. And on the government side, I spent 14 years as a town board supervisor, and out of those 4 years as the chairman. Within that time also, I served 8 years as the chairman for the St. Croix County unit to the Wisconsin Towns Association. So I'll probably leave it at that.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, I don't have nearly as much experience as these other fellows here, but I'm 24. I just graduated school in last May, and I'm working as an engineer at an electronics manufacturer, and this is my first government experience.
My name is Dan Hansen. This is my 4th term on the county board. I retired from USDA, and I take care of my grandkids when I'm not doing county board things. That's me.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Fiedler, my 2nd term on the board, and basically I had a 40-year career somewhere revolving around the law in Washington, D.C. for the most part, and also like Scott, I had a career in the military, but I was in the Army Reserve as opposed to the National Guard. Great to see everybody.
I'm Dave Osnes, along with our distinguished chair. This is my 6th term on the county board. I serve on the transportation and HHS committees for WCA. I'm on the NACO transportation committee at the national level, and I'll let her go with that.
Hi, my name is Kara Cook. This is in 2015, I filled in a vacant position on the county board, so I was on the board for about a year then. Prior to that, I have served in the early 2000s, served a couple terms on the Hudson City Council. And my background is in local and regional government. Where I worked in technology, project, policy analysis, things like that for the last about 20 years.
Okay, my name is Paul Burning. I represent District 7 in Hudson, And my background is small business consultant currently for the last 4 years. So I work with small and medium-sized retailers across the Twin Cities and I guess all over the United States. I have clients that I work with. My background, I'm married with, we have 4 kids together and 15 years. We'll be 16 coming up, so that's pretty cool. I'm the current president of the Hudson Area Library Board of Trustees and Daybreak Rotarian, and so that's my civic contribution. Soccer coach in the fall, so that's it.
Greg, we'll start with you, and then we'll go clockwise across, and then by rows there.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't see what you see.
Oh,
so
I'm
you're gonna
sorry.
have to tell us
Okay,
who's
Greg,
next.
go ahead. Greg Telejohn, go ahead.
Yeah. Craig Telejohn, District 14. Have owned Digital Garage for about 20 years here in Hudson. So I say I live in Hudson, but I sleep in Aaron Prairie. So I've been computer sales and service. So I filled out about a 6-month position when Andy Brinkman left the board last year, and now I'm full-time supervisor. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Greg. Kathy Leaf?
So I am in my first term, obviously, with you all, and I'm looking forward to serving with you. I'm in my second term on the Village of North Hudson trustees, so I have some experience with local government. I have a communications and marketing background. I'm a graduate of UW River Falls, and I actually work there now as a marketing specialist. My degree is in ag education, so I have a background in agriculture and farming issues as well. I'm a mom of a teenager who's been homeschooling, so that's pretty exciting. He also plays the tuba in the marching band, so I am the band mom. But I enjoy this area, and I look forward to serving my community. I am a person who likes to volunteer and move things forward, so I'm excited to have this opportunity.
Thank you. Judy Achterhoff?
Yeah, this is my 4th term on the board as supervisor. I was on a school board in Glenwood City for 10, 15 years, and I've also served on a couple library boards. I have 2 kids, one's in Seattle, so that's been interesting listening to her stories. But looking forward to working with everybody that's new and old.
Thank you. Riccatino?
This is Rick Otino, District 8. I'm retired from DuPont, and if any of you are still driving a Ford Ranger, we had all the paint in the building before they closed it, and that was probably what we had 35 years, and now we're here in Hudson. We've been here 20 years, and I like to volunteer with my dogs. Right now, because of the COVID, we haven't been able to because of the restrictions, but usually we go to the nursing homes in both Baldwin and Hudson Hospital. So thank you.
Thank you. And let's see, we have Shelley Tomczyk. Go ahead.
My name is Shelley Tomczyk, and I live in Baldwin. I've been in Baldwin about a little over 10 years. I work at the Public Defender's Office, and I've been there for 11 years, 12 years in criminal defense. And I have 4 children, 2 biological and 2 foster. That's about my background. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. At this time, then I'll turn the meeting over to Pat Thompson, County Administrator.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to welcome all the new county board supervisors and returning county board supervisors to today's orientation session. And before I say anything more, I want to introduce all the staff that are participating on the conference call. I'll start with our corporation counsel, Scott Cox. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Scott Cox. I've been practicing law for almost 31 years, a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Law School in 1989. I've been a corporation counsel for approximately 25 years. I've also served in the capacity of providing advice to other municipalities when I was in the private sector. I've been with St. Croix County approximately 6.5 years.
Thank you, Scott. By way of a little background, Scott and I worked in Dunn County, Wisconsin, and that's where I got to really appreciate Scott's legal advice and also his social interaction skills. And he keeps us all smiling, and he provides us excellent legal advice. And I was able to convince Scott to come over to St. Croix County, and I'm so happy he did. And now I'd like to introduce his assistant corporation counsel, Heather Amos.
Hi, I'm Heather Amos. I am one of the assistant corporation counsels for St. Croix County. I've worked for the county since 2002 with a brief 2.5-year stint in Eau Claire County. I've been practicing law for 12 years. I obtained my law degree from Hamline University School of Law. I have a 21-year-old who's in college and just recently got married. Some of you may recognize my new last name as Amos. It was previously Wolski. So I will be presenting on open meetings today, and if anybody has any questions either during or after, you can feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email.
Thank you, Heather. I'd also like to introduce Ken Witt. Ken is actually in the county board room with the county board supervisors that are in attendance. Ken?
Thank you, Pat. I've been in local government in Wisconsin for 24 years, the last 4 years with St. Croix County. I'm the assistant county administrator and also head up the finance department.
Thank you, Ken. Who else with staff are in attendance?
Cindy Campbell.
Cindy?
Yep, I'm here. I'm Cindy Campbell. I'm the county clerk. I'm in my 18th year as county clerk and have over 20 years with St. Croix County. I'm a lifelong resident of St. Croix County. Have lived within about a 6-mile radius all my life, and married. We'll be celebrating 36 years of marriage this year, and we have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. So.
Thank you, Cindy. Any other department heads? Ken, are you aware? Oh, okay. Before I introduce Andy Phillips, I've met all the new county board supervisors. I started working in St. Croix County in 2011, right after the reorganized in 2010. And this, I think, is my 5th orientation session with new county board supervisors. Bill Peavy, Supervisor Peavy, who is not on the call today, is the only board member that is currently on the board when I came in 2011. We try to make our orientation sessions meaningful, informative, helpful for county board supervisors. I look forward to working with all of you on the various committee assignments, and we'll get a lot of good things accomplished in the next 2 years. Our staff is second to none. We will try to make your jobs enjoyable, meaningful, informative over the course of the next 2 years while you serve out your terms. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our one of our speakers today, Andy Phillips, who is an attorney and does a lot of work with the Wisconsin Counties Association. And he's an expert in his field, and he'll be talking to us today a little bit about roles and responsibilities of county board supervisors. Andy?
Thank you, Pat, and good afternoon, members of the board. Congratulations on your election. I will tell you that I have been practicing fewer years than Scott, but more than Heather, so you can guess where I fall in that range. I have been in private practice for my entire career, and I've represented the Counties Association. I'm privileged to be general counsel for the association for the past 15 years. And so as part of what I do, I have the opportunity to see a lot of county boards, a lot of meetings, and a lot of activities for counties all throughout the state. And this is a particular discussion that I think, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 6 years ago, I think, at the board meeting when I first provided a roles and responsibilities overview. Right. And it's based on my experience, and it's one of those things where in all of my travels and all my experience in dealing with different counties, you come out with some, what I view to be best practices, thoughts, and this presentation is an amalgamation of those thoughts, best practices, along with some legal underpinnings as it relates to your role as a county board supervisor. So hopefully it's a good discussion today. First time I've ever done it virtually, so we'll see how it goes.
Same with me, Andy. Same for all of us, I think. Anyway, we'll try to make it special, right? I think we're going to start now with a brief video that was produced by the Wisconsin Counties Association several years ago. I'm not sure, Andy, how many years this video has been around, but it's good. And I think it will be a very good start for our session today. Ken, do you want to get that going?
Yes, sir.
There are 72 makes our communities great places to live, work, and raise a family. While we know what county we live in, most of us don't know what counties do. Think about your day so far. Did you get to where you are on a state highway or a county road? That road was maintained by the county. If it snowed last night, guess how the road got salted and cleared? That's right. A county snowplow was out there working for you. Whether you realize it or not, your county is part of almost every milestone in your life. The Register of Deeds provides us with birth and death certificates. When you bought your home, the Register of Deeds recorded the sale. Getting married? You'll need to stop at the county clerk's office to make it official with a marriage license. Have you voted? The county clerk oversees all elections. Counties also play an important role in economic development by encouraging new investment in our communities. This investment results in new jobs and a higher quality of life for our citizens. Counties do lots of other important things too. Have an emergency? The 911 dispatch center is run by your county, and county sheriffs provide law enforcement and operate the jails. Counties also operate the state court system. County health departments protect public health and make sure our communities stay healthy. Counties are responsible for the places you love to go, like county parks, airports, and zoos. And counties help care for many of our most vulnerable citizens. The Human Services Department looks out for our children, the elderly, and people with disabilities, and administers state and federal aid programs. Counties also help farmers through conservation efforts and work to keep our lakes and rivers clean. So even though you may not be aware of it, counties touch nearly every aspect of your life. What may be even more surprising, however, is what a bargain county services are. While we all know the feeling of opening up our property tax bill a few weeks before the holidays, did you know counties account for less than 20% of the average property tax bill? That's right. Less than 20 cents on every dollar you pay in property taxes goes to fund the services which make Wisconsin such a wonderful place. The state relies on counties to provide the best state services efficiently and at the lowest possible cost to taxpayers. So that's the county story. Want to learn more? Get to know your county elected officials at your county's website. Check out a meeting of your county board. It's open to the public and held at your local courthouse. Or visit the Wisconsin Counties Association at www.wicounties.org. Counties, helping to make Wisconsin great.
Thank you, Ken. At this point, we'll turn it over to Andy Phillips, and he's going to take us through a presentation on roles and responsibilities.
Are you tired of the
Welcome back.
media spinning the truth and pushing false narratives? Well, take a look at this. Over the
What was
last
that?
3 years, while the establishment media was pushing false narratives,
I mean, maybe that one was pertinent, but we'll close it for now.
Take it away, Andy.
Thank you, Pat. And I think, Ken, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen on the PowerPoint and see if this works. There it is. Hopefully everybody can see that. And I'm going to start this from the beginning. There we go. So I think we have the presentation in front of us. As I mentioned earlier, I typically provide this type of discussion in live format. And so I always encourage a back and forth and discussion as it relates to the slides I'm going to go through. I'm not going to be able to monitor what it is that anybody wants to say. So if you want to throw stuff at the screen and pretend you're throwing stuff at me, that's fine too. But hopefully at some point, somebody can monitor the room and the other chat features within our Zoom here. If there are questions or comments, we can certainly get to them. So let's start with this whole concept of the peculiar nature of Wisconsin county government. Our authority comes from Chapter 59 of the statutes. Contrast that with city and village municipal authority, which derives from the Constitution. So counties already, in terms of the foundational principle, are a bit different than our counterparts in cities, villages. Counties are a body corporate. They can sue and be sued. So we have a separate and distinct legal status apart from that of the state. We are a body corporate. But our powers are limited by state statute. Unlike municipalities who have this concept of constitutional home rule authority, counties are really creatures of the legislature that exist by virtue of Chapter 59 and the Wisconsin Constitution, and we enjoy what's a little bit more limited than what our city and village counterparts have in terms of home rule authority. Our home rule authority is referred to as administrative home rule authority found in Chapter 59 of the statutes. All 72 counties in Wisconsin are governed by a board of supervisors. The size of the board varies greatly throughout the state. We have boards as small as 7 and boards as large as 38. As I mentioned before, we have administrative home rule authority found in 59.03 sub 1 of the statutes. And that provision grants counties the authority to organize their local administrative affairs in the manner that they see fit. And so as much as all 72 counties are governed by the same set of statutes in Chapter 59, every county operates just a little differently because different localities have different types of traditions, different types of procedures, different types of regulations that they like to follow. And the legislature has recognized and granted counties that authority to organize in different ways. So I want to start with this quiz, and this kind of highlights the peculiar nature of county government. We can all name the 3 branches of federal government based on Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 of our Constitution. We have a legislature, House and Senate, we have an executive branch, and we have a judicial branch. Same holds for state governments. We have clear divisions between our legislative branch, our executive branch, and our judicial branch. Even when you get down to the example of city government in Chapter 62 of the Wisconsin statute, we have 3 distinct branches of city government, that being legislative, the executive branch with the mayor, and then we have a municipal court system. So then we have the question, what are the 3 branches of county government? After all, it's governments. We understand that counties are a body corporate separate and apart from the state that created counties. So do we have 3 branches of county government? Well, we have a legislative branch, we have a county board, an executive branch, either a county executive, a county administrator, or an administrative coordinator. But do we have a judicial branch? And normally I'd ask somebody in the audience to volunteer an answer as to whether we have a judicial branch, but I'll spoil it and say, no, we don't. Our court system is a state court system. And so counties, while at times we act in what's referred to as a quasi-judicial capacity, making decisions about land use rights and other rights and privileges granted under the county code, we don't have a specific judicial branch. So the question comes, why are counties different than every other layer of government? And is just because of that difference, do we have to operate differently than every other layer of government? Well, let me give you just a brief history overview as to why I think that counties are different than every other layer of government. When we go back to the founding of our state in 1848, it was very, very challenging to get information from the seat of state government down in Madison up to, for example, Hudson, St. Croix County. And so the state needed a local presence within each different jurisdiction or region throughout the state, and the state created counties for that local presence. And when you think about the local presence, really we have state officers, the constitutional officers in county government, those state officers that exist for purposes of assisting in the administration of state affairs. Our sheriff enforces state laws. Our register of deeds records state records. Our county clerk records certain state vital records. Our treasurer collects state money. So in reality, when we look at the constitutional officers and placement within counties, we have a system that really is designed to be an administrative efficiency for the state. Now, does that mean that all counties do is the state's bidding? The answer is no. And I think when you look at the operations associated with Wisconsin county government, they're incredibly complex. And every year that goes by, they become more and more complex. The thing that is a bit frustrating, I think, for all of us to recognize, understand, and think about is how the set of organizational rules that impact counties are the same in 1848 in substantial part as they are today. And so we've got a real complex set of responsibilities and operational requirements grafted upon a system created in 1848, which provides challenges. So that leads to my second question. Does that mean that counties have to operate differently than the other layers? In other words, do we have to just ignore the fact that we don't have a clear delineation between the branches associated with county government? I'm going to get more into that in a bit, but I think you're hopefully going to find after the presentation today is that if we have a clear understanding of the role of policy, the role of administration, that we don't have to operate differently, even though we don't have clear delineation among the various branches. In terms of forms of county government, counties in Wisconsin, all 72 counties have to choose one of three forms: county executive form, administrator form, or administrative coordinator form. As you can see from the list here, we've got 11 executive counties, 28 administrator counties, and then we have the greater number of counties that have administrative coordinator. There has been a shift recently, I'd say within the last 20 to 25 years, to move administrative coordinator to administrator. And so we've seen the number of administrator counties increase, and I think that's a result of counties recognizing that they'd like to have professional management, so to speak, within the counties. And so you see a definite move toward that. But again, the majority of the counties have administrative coordinator. So let's talk about that briefly in each form and what it does. First, we have the county executive form, which is governed by 59.17 of the statutes. As an overview, the county executive acts like the executive branch, or what you would expect the executive branch to act like. The county executive appoints and supervises department heads subject to board confirmation, appoints members to boards and commissions, submits an annual budget to the county board, and then has veto authority over the budget and other county ordinances and resolutions that come before the county executive. The executive's veto authority can be overridden with a 2/3 vote of the board. Then we look at 59.18, which is the statute that governs the county administrator form. That is, of course, the form that governs in St. Croix County. You have an administrator. The county administrator is the chief administrator of the county, responsible for coordinating administrative and management functions that are not specifically vested by law in other departments or officials. The administrator appoints and supervises department heads subject to board confirmation, appoints members to boards and commissions subject to board confirmation, and submits an annual budget. Yes.
It's a really important point right now with the county administrator, so I wanted to just stop you for a sec. Your voice is kind of cutting in and out sometimes. I think Pat was seeing that too, so if you want to make sure you got a good connection on your microphone. It gets
I am sorry about that.
back up, but.
Sometimes it's my headset, my earbuds that are working here, and I found that works better than the speaker. Am I coming through okay now?
You are, correct.
Okay. So yes, this is an important part when it comes to county administrator in 59.18, because what I want to point out is that even though the legislature uses some different terminology in 59.18 and 59.17 as it relates to the county executive, in function, the county administrator acts an awful lot like the county executive. And so when we have a county executive, I think when we talk about the clarity between the distinction between the legislative branch in county government and the executive branch in county government, it becomes pretty clear. After all, it's easy to think of the county executive as being the executive branch because the word executive is in the name. When it comes to county administrator, it's not as crystal clear, but if you look at the function of county administrator, it is clear, at least to me, that there is a definite distinction between the county that has an administrator, between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Aside from the fact that the county executive is elected in a countywide election and the administrator is appointed, and the fact that the executive enjoys veto authority and the administrator does not have veto authority, there's really functionally no difference between an executive and an administrator. And then we have administrative coordinator. An administrative coordinator is a catch-all. For counties that choose not to have an executive or an administrator, they're required to have an administrative coordinator. And that's governed by section 59.19 of the statutes. That statute is very broad. The statute is very vague. It says the administrative coordinator is responsible for coordinating administrative and management functions not otherwise vested in law in the board or commissions or other elected officers. The administrative coordinator position varies in function widely through the counties that have, the 33 counties that have the administrative coordinator position. In some counties, the county clerk is the administrative coordinator, and in other counties, they have a standalone position as administrative coordinator. So 59.19 leaves a lot to be desired in terms of its specificity. So let's talk about the function and the role of county board supervisors. We'll start with the legislative branch in county government. County board supervisors serve a legislative function. They make policy, they approve budgets, they operate in a cooperative environment where decision-making authority doesn't vest with any single county board supervisor, but instead, the policy-making function is exercised as a whole, cooperatively among the entire body of supervisors. So when we talk about functions, the board's role is to be involved, to represent, and to be accountable to the public, determine service levels, adopt a budget and levy taxes to support that budget, regulate within the statutory authority ceded by the state. In other words, enact policy. So we talk about the legislative branch enacting policy. The county board chair is essentially the head of the legislative body. The county board chair does not have any sort of independent authority as it relates to the operations within county government. In many ways, the county board chair is very similar to the Speaker of the Assembly, the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, all other heads of a legislative body. The county board's chair is to make sure that the board's business is getting done in an efficient manner. So the county board chair, by statute, presides over meetings of the county board, administers oaths, countersigns ordinance, commonly acts as a spokesperson for the county board, subject to county rules in relation to that particular task, guides issues through the board, and typically appoints committee members subject to board information. So the supervisor's authority is collective and not individual. Even when appointed as a committee chair, a supervisor has no recognized individual authority over any aspect of operations associated with county government or the Department of County Government. So then the question is, do supervisors actually supervise anything? And the answer is no. I think that supervisor is a bit of a misnomer that's contained within Chapter 59 of the statutes. And I'd love it if they went through and rewrote that and called us all county board members and not supervisors. And so we have to keep that in mind, that even though you're called a county board supervisor, there really is no management supervision type part to your particular job or role. So I indicate there, thanks legislature for creating confusion with the name. And so I like to talk about the county board's role as being basically comprised of two parts. It's a dual role. The county board adopts policy. We've talked about that. Enacting budgets, adopting ordinances, passing resolutions. It adopts policy. But then second, the county board holds staff accountable for implementation of that policy. And so if the county board adopts policy and there's a problem with implementation, the first person the board ought to talk to is your administrator. And Patrick Thompson ought to appear before the board and have a discussion about how implementation is working on a particular policy. And when you do these things, when you accept the dual role of the supervisor, you adopt policy and you hold those charged with carrying out the policy accountable for carrying out that policy, you become a visionary. And it should be everybody on the county board's mission in life to become known as a visionary throughout the county. And if you're doing that, you're doing your job the right way. So let's talk about, we've talked about the dual roles of the board and the board members. Let's talk about administration roles and responsibilities. It's much different than the county board's role. If we recognize the county board's role to enact policy and hold administration accountable for implementation of the policy, then staff's primary responsibility is to carry out policy, but then its secondary responsibility is to provide the board with the information necessary to make an informed policy decision. Staff doesn't have the ability to make policy unless it's internal and unless the board grants that authority to staff, to administration. So again, when we talk about the focus of department heads and staff, implement policies and strategy, their focus is shorter term. They're focused on the smaller functions and day-to-day operations. They address the individual and departmental issues that arise day-to-day in the operation of county government. They're required to pay attention to detail, and they have spent their entire career devoted to ensuring that they know how to best perform the operational functions within their particular department of county government. They are not known as the broad policymakers. They are not known as the broad visionaries. Staff has a much more focused expertise and focus on county government operations. And this is where I typically get into trouble in the discussion, because I think about the distinction between board and staff in terms of the qualifications necessary to take a seat in a particular chair. And so when we're out there looking at qualifications for staff in county government, I like to think of this as, imagine that you're hiring a county highway commissioner. You want that county highway commissioner to have a degree, oftentimes be an engineer. And so when you put the help wanted sign out, you say, give me somebody who's got a degree. Give me somebody who's got experience dealing with county highways. Give me somebody who's got experience in civil engineering. We're going to check their background to make sure that they're clean. We're going to see if they can be bonded to make sure that they don't have any fidelity issues in their background. We want to make sure they're current on their professional accreditation. We also want to make sure that they're a member of all various associations and others that can provide information and knowledge to allow that highway commissioner, the best highway commissioner that the county has ever seen. Now think about the help wanted sign when it comes to the board. It's a very simple help wanted sign. You have to be elected by the people, and you have to have some sort of local connection, and you can't be a felon. And so when we talk about the background qualifications necessary to take a seat on the board, it's very different than the background qualifications necessary to take a seat as staff. And I will tell you, I'm the first one to admit that we have all sorts of board members throughout the state of Wisconsin who are incredibly talented, who have all sorts of education, experience, and other qualifications that contribute to being an effective board member. But that's not the function of the board. Remember, the function of the board is to be a visionary. In order to be a visionary, you have to have that connection to the people, because that's your primary responsibility. So then if the board's primary qualifications are elected by the people, have that local connection, then the board needs to hand off to staff what is necessary to implement the policy that the board is going to be a visionary about, and that becomes critical. So I like to break down the distinction between policy and administration in a simple example using 5 questions: what, why, where, when, and how. And I think about it this way. Let's imagine that there is some sort of resolution that comes before the board to establish a hiking trail system in St. Croix County. The question about whether the system is going to benefit the county. Should we build this hiking trail? That's a board decision. The board has to make the decision about building a hiking trail. Staff on its own can't decide that one day it's going to up and build a hiking trail system throughout the county. That's a board decision. The how, the when, the where, who's going to build and maintain the system, what's the time frame for implementation, where's the system going to need to be maintained? Those are all staff questions, all right? And again, if this resolution is introduced at the county board level, what's the first question a county board member is going to ask? How are we going to pay for it? All right, so there's going to be detailed questions associated with the initial question of, are we going to build the system? But that highlights, remember, the dual role of the policymaker and of staff. Remember, staff has a responsibility for carrying out the policy directive from the board, but the staff also has the responsibility of providing the information to the board to make an informed policy decision. So when that resolution comes before the board, staff is going to provide the information, all of the details associated with building out this hiking trail system. But then once that resolution is adopted, and once the board makes the determination that you're going to build a hiking trail system according to the specifications approved within the resolution, that entire policy decision gets handed off to staff for implementation. And as staff is implementing, if you run into problems with building out this hiking trail system, does that mean that a county board supervisor grabs a shovel and goes out, starts digging and helping out and building that trail? No. If there are problems that arise, then it's the board's responsibility. Again, according to the dual role, it's the board's responsibility to hold staff accountable for implementation. You bring in your county administrator, you bring in others and ask questions about implementation and hold them accountable. And so a lot of this, you'll see throughout this presentation, is based upon my view of what occurs in other counties, my view of best practices, having dealt with a variety of private, public sector, nonprofit organizations throughout the year. But also there are underpinnings, even though it's not clear in Chapter 59, there are underpinnings in the law that talk about this distinction between policymakers and administrators. And we have this example in the Schutte versus Vanderhay case. That's a 1996 Court of Appeals case that dealt with a dispute between the role of the policymaking branch in county government and the executive branch. And so in the court's decision, it first cited to an attorney general decision in that or opinion. And the attorney general opinion talked about how the county board's functions primarily policymaking and legislative, whereby the executive, in this case it was a county executive, but you can replace that with administrator, functions as an administrator and manager. According to the dictionary definition of the terms, policy is defined as a high-level overall plan embracing the goals and acceptable procedures, especially a governmental body. By contrast, legislative power is the authority to make laws or not enforce them, or appoint and to appoint the people who are charged with the duty of such enforcement. Again, remember the dual role, hold those accountable for implementation of policy. And that's according to the leading treatise on municipal corporations that's out there. So we've got dictionary definitions, attorney general opinions. We've got the leading treatise that's informing this distinction between the policymaking branch and the executive or administrative branch within county government. And then we have finally the court saying the crucial test for determining whether a matter is legislative or whether it's administrative has said to be whether the decision makes a new law or it executes a law already in existence. If it's execution, administrative or executive function. If it's making a new law, it's a legislative function. So then when we talk about leadership roles within county government, we have non-elected department heads. Those individuals have a leadership role within their particular department according to the guidelines, policies, procedures, the written directive from the county board and clarified through directives issued by your administrator. Individual county board supervisors, again, have no individual management or leadership role outside of the particular committees or commissions on which they serve. The leadership role for the county board, just like the policymaking role, is collective. You exercise your authority in a collective manner. So what happens if we don't have clear delineation between the policymaking branch of county government and the administrative branch of county government? There are a whole host of things that can happen, and I've seen this in various forms throughout my years in working with various counties throughout the state. And I will tell you that some counties are better than others when it comes to addressing some of these problems and addressing the distinction between policy and administration. But I want to point out one bullet point here that I think is particularly important, because I think that that runs through a lot of the other bullet points. And it's about halfway down where you see the words reactivity versus proactivity. If a county board is going to be visionary and a county board is going to focus on enacting policy and holding those charged with implementing that policy accountable, that county board is going to be proactive. It's not going to be reactive. And what I mean by that is the county board is going to establish the plan for the county, and then any problems that arise in implementation are going to be problems that the administrator and the administrator's department heads handle. A reactive board waits for problems to happen and then deals with them on an ad hoc basis. That's why there are many county boards throughout the state that have meetings that run on for hours and hours and hours, is that they are dealing with problems as they arise instead of in a proactive manner. So if I could encourage you to do anything coming out of today's discussion, it is to be proactive instead of reactive. If you're proactive instead of reactive, you're going to find you have shorter meetings. You're going to feel like those meetings have meaning, and we all want to feel like meetings have meaning. Meeting for the sake of meeting accomplishes nothing. And so if we can have meetings with meaning, that means we're being proactive, and it means we're shortening those meetings, and it means we're accomplishing something. We all want to feel like we're accomplishing something as a result of these meetings and as a result of doing what it is that we do as county board members. So let's try to strive for proactivity as opposed to reactivity. Let's talk about board committee roles and responsibilities. Under 59.13, the board has broad authority through resolution to designate committees of the board, appoint members of that board, and give those committees a charge. And so when we establish these committees, you'll see various throughout the state, various counties doing it various ways. Some counties have upwards of 30 to 40 committees, other counties have 5 committees. How many committees is up to you, but what I would really recommend is that you have clarity in terms of the role of those committees and their oversight function as it relates to the particular departments that fall under the committee's umbrella. When I say oversight role, I'm not talking about operational and management oversight. Your departments are managed by your administrator. What I'm talking about is jurisdictional oversight as it relates to policy measures that will allow your various departments to achieve what it is that you want them to achieve. And so when we talk about the role of the committees, set out that role, give them a charge, and be very explicit in terms of the committee's responsibility. When we talk about the functions of those committees, you monitor performance, you don't perform for the committee. You have policy oversight functions. You review their budget and make budget recommendations. You draft ordinances and resolutions that impact those departments, and you assist in policy development. Who are you assisting in policy development? As a committee, you're assisting the board. And when we think about it, for example, with the way our state government is organized, the assembly has any number of committees, and there is no legislative measure that comes before the assembly that isn't first vetted by a committee. And it has to have a particular piece of legislation, has to have a positive vote coming out of a committee in order to get to the assembly floor. The same holds true in county government. The committee rolls up the sleeves and does the dirty work of evaluating policy developments and then makes a recommendation to the board on policy development. And ultimately, it's up to the board as to whether a particular measure is actually enacted in the policy. So, counties are structured so that counties should do much of that preliminary work and make the recommendations to the full board. It's at the committee level where the committee ought to gain the knowledge, expertise, and understand what's needed, what's achievable, how much it's going to cost, how do we implement these new strategies and goals. How do the committees gain that knowledge, expertise, and be in that position? They gain that through staff, through department heads, through your administrator, through administration, through others who can provide that technical, that very, very educated, that knowledge that is going to give you the necessary information to make an informed policy decision. So when we look at the organizational chart, understanding the distinction between the policy-making role within county government and the administrative role within county government, we have a county board, we have county board committees, and then we have an administrator. And the administrator then is responsible for the department heads and the county staff that fall under those department heads. As you know, there's no arrow that goes between county staff or department head back up to county board or committee. Does that mean there's no interaction? Of course not. There's interaction. The committees that we just talked about are going to have interaction with the department heads to find out what's going on organizationally within the county. But the county board does through, by virtue of a system and a process that it has with the administrator and with the department heads, about the various reports that are necessary for the committees to, again, make informed policy decisions. But then we have this whole concept of constitutional officers. I talked about that previously. In this system of constitutional officers, where do they fall on the organizational chart? That's confusing as heck that we have these constitutional officers because they have independent authority under the Wisconsin Constitution. If you look at Article 6, Section 4, Article 7, Section 12 of the Constitution, those officers are identified. But you know what? Here's the beauty of it. They're identified in the Constitution, but the Constitution doesn't tell us exactly what their duties and job description are. And for that matter, Chapter 59 doesn't give us a clear explanation of exactly how constitutional officers fall on the organizational chart. So when we talk about it, I like to use this dual role thing. We talk about the dual persona of constitutional officers. Constitutional officers have a vital role in the county organizational chart. They serve in a capacity where they manage employees that fall within their department. In that context, they work with the administrator, and according to county board policy, as it relates to management of those employees, they don't have free rein on the employees within their department. Those employees are employees of the county. And as we know from section 59.22 of the statutes, the county board controls the terms and conditions of that employment relationship. So the constitutional officers work with the administrator, work with the county board as it relates to the administrative functions associated with their office. As it relates to the core constitutional or statutory functions of their office, they're responsible for the electorate. So the county board can't tell the sheriff how to enforce the laws. The sheriff has independent constitutional authority when it comes to enforcing the laws. But the sheriff does have to administer the employment regulations associated with the deputies and others that fall within the sheriff's department within that office. The sheriff has to administer those in accordance with what the administrator provides and what the county board provides in terms of regulations and policies. So then we get to the part of this where we talk about takeaways. I love this assessment because this assessment is incredibly good as it relates to describing what it is that boards do and don't do. Most of what the majority of boards do, whether they be county boards, city councils, village boards, state government, nonprofit boards, boards of directors of for-profit corporations, most of what they do either does not need to be done or is a waste of time when done by the board. Conversely, most of what boards need to do for strategic leadership is not done. All right? I'm not going to attribute that quote. I'm not going to tell you that quote is 100% right. I'm not going to tell you that that quote is applicable to St. Croix County. What I'm going to tell you is that when you look at this slide and think about broad assessment, we get back to that whole discussion of reactivity versus proactivity. What does proactivity look like? Proactivity looks like strategic leadership. Reactivity does not. Reactivity sounds an awful lot like what the first sentence described in terms of what does not need to be done or is a waste of time when done by the board. Ask yourself the question, does a visionary provide strategic leadership? The answer is yes. And so again, in the back of your minds, plant that seed. Say, am I acting like a visionary? Am I being proactive? Are we as a collective whole, we as a board, are we focused on the long term, the strategic? Or are we focused on the reactive short term? Work together as a goal with the administrative team. Each of you have an understanding of roles and responsibilities. As a board, try not to interfere with the job of administration. As administration, try not to interfere with the job of the board. On both sides, administration and board, devote the time needed to do a great job. Read the background materials that staff has prepared. They've taken a lot of time and put a lot of effort into those background materials, so read them, understand them. If you have questions, ask questions. Third bullet is great. Admit what you don't know. There are many county board supervisors that are brand new to this. I have no idea how it is that you can sit in that seat and make a decision dealing with complex human service functions, for example, on a multi-million-dollar budget question. That boggles my mind. That's frightening. That's daunting. It's okay to admit that you don't know anything. And remember, as a board member, it's not your job to know everything. Your job is to be accountable to the public, to have a connection to the people that we serve. And so lean on staff to get you the information that you believe is necessary to make an informed policy decision. Don't make promises outside board meetings. Mr. Cox is going to tell you that raises legal questions. And you've also got open meetings issues that you're going to have to deal with. You're going to hear about in just a moment from Heather. I think that's a concern. Beyond those legal reasons, that just leads to chaos and problems. So listen to what your constitutional officers, your employees, your administration, what they are providing, what information they're providing to you. Don't make promises outside those board meetings and conduct the county's business within the confines of the county. If somebody complains to you, a member of the public, another employee within the county, if they complain to you about a member of administration, it's okay to listen, but don't agree. Support administration to the extent you can. And if you have a problem with something that administration is doing, whether it's a department head, another member of the administrative team, for that matter, a constitutional officer, who do you address that with? You address it with Mr. Thompson. You go to your administrator and you say, I'm hearing these different things. How do we best address this? And so in other words, have a practice and a policy of following a chain of command as it relates to resolving these things. Remember that staff has an obligation to remain politically neutral. They don't have the ability to take sides. I always like to say, as a lawyer, I don't have the luxury of a personal opinion. I get paid to say what opinions I need to have, all right? So there's no such thing as staff having a political position, but they are politically savvy. They understand the politics of a given situation, and that can be incredibly complicated. So remember that staff is doing an incredibly complicated job here, and they're not taking a side. Even if you believe the answer that they are providing you assumes that they're taking a side. Don't assume that. They're trying to do their job as best they can. So again, that key to staff success is remaining politically savvy while at the same time being politically neutral. So with that, I think I'm through. I was told by Mr. Thompson that I have 30 to 40 minutes. I'm at minute 34 right now. And so that gives us a couple of minutes for questions. And since Scott has been doing this longer than me and he's got more gray hair than me, I'm proud to say that, he can feel free to pipe in and disagree with anything I've just said.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I'm sure there are some good questions out there, so let's open it up for questions.
Okay, anybody just speak up. I guess that's the easiest way.
Any questions at all for Andy Phillips?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Paul. Are these materials that you presented available on the St. Croix or the County Association's webpage, like the presentation you just made?
I actually I sent it to Ken, and so if Ken has it, he can certainly share it with everybody.
It's in the packet for today's material. It was added to that packet, and a broadcast of this meeting will be available on our IQM2 system.
Judy
Achterhoff?
Go ahead, Judy.
It's not a question. It's more of an observation that in my 6 years on the board, a lot of times something will come from a committee and some other board member who was not on the committee has some really great questions that the committee was unaware of or it opened. So don't be afraid to ask questions at the board meeting, even though the committee has brought this forward. And even if all 5 of them have agreed on it, there can still be some changes made to enhance it or improve it. So just wanted to let people know that it's not final when it comes from the committee. It still has to come to the board where you can ask any questions you want.
I think that's a great point, and if I may, there is a process for re-referral of resolutions and other matters that come before the board. And so if there is a situation where the board takes a look and says we have additional questions, there's always the re-referral process. That's why it's there.
I think it's so important, Judy, that you brought that up, and for us as a board, for you as a board to ask a lot of questions of your fellow supervisors and of staff. And we have 5 standing committees. Most of you serve on at least one. Some of you serve on 2 of the 5 standing committees. And there is a certain amount of reliance amongst board members that when an issue comes in front of the board, that it has been thoroughly vetted and questioned and researched by the standing committee that's bringing it forward. But there, for those members that do not serve on those committees, that's an opportunity once it gets to the board floor to really ask some questions, and don't hesitate to question staff of anything that comes up, because although that committee, has done their homework and researched it, the other members need to have a good understanding of the issue as well. So good point, Judy.
If I might, Pat, if we don't have other questions, as I mentioned, typically I provide this type of discussion in live format, which leads to really good discussions typically. I would really encourage you, there are times that whether it be at the WCA's annual conference or at other workshop and opportunities where we get together, come and have the discussion with me and others about this, because hearing from your counterparts throughout the state about what works and what doesn't work can be incredibly valuable. I know Pat always is a regular attendee at the county execs and administrators meetings that we have. Now we have them weekly, but we typically have them twice per year. And it's a great opportunity to share experiences of what works and what doesn't work. And so even though we're having this discussion at orientation, don't allow this to be a once every 2 years discussion. feel free, if you see me at a conference, you see me out and about, stop and ask me about questions that you have. Always happy to engage in this, because ways that you can improve and become a better board member, you're going to find that to be a much more rewarding experience. You'll get more out of it, I think, if you do that.
Andy, would you just say it a little bit more slowly and one more time, the conversation about, you used the phrase visionary, talking about the role of a supervisor as policymaker, and the definition of policymaker and the definition of operations in that relationship one more time.
Sure, and I'll try to provide the overview. And so a visionary, when it comes to policymaking, is somebody who focuses on the policies, in other words, the framework, the structure under which operations is going to operate. And so when we talk about the role of the policymaker, it's to establish, for example, the handbook, the employee handbook, in terms of determining and counting who has what vacation days and approving paid time off, and determining the cause associated with separation of employment. Those are all jobs that your administrator and your human resources professionals do. And so you, as the county board, as the visionary, say, here's how we're going to operate within St. Croix County as it relates to our employees. But then the day-to-day, the focused administration of those policies gets handed off to your administrator and your human resources professionals. An example that I've seen in counties is I've been in county board committee meetings where they take a long time to approve vouchers for payment of things like paper clips and copy paper and other minutia, all right? Even though all of those expenditures have already been approved in the county budget. To me, the policy, the visionary, the vision is already in the county budget. And if you've approved the expenditure within the budget, why does a committee need to then approve the expenditure again? It's already been done. So again, that is just, in my mind, the basic framework as it relates to the distinction between policymakers and administrators or staff.
And I might just add the point, using your example, Andy, then, and in your presentation, you spoke of accountability. So, okay, once the budget is approved, you hold your department heads and your county administrator accountable so that we're staying within that policy document. We're staying within the guidelines established by the board for the budget. And then, you know, that's where that accountability piece falls into it. I think that's a very critical point, is that policymakers, you do not give up the reins of accountability. You hold your administrator accountable.
And I think further to that point, Pat, I would say that I've seen it in other counties. I don't know if St. Croix does it, but I think it would be appropriate for committees to ask for, if you get together every month, a monthly report on budget performance. How are we doing as compared to budget? That would be a function of that accountability feature you just discussed, Pat.
Exactly. Yep. Thanks.
I'll just throw something in, Pat, if I might. In my personal experience, over my career on the board here, I have had maybe an employee from the county contact me, feeling they were being treated unfairly in some manner or other. And my response to that individual was that it is my policy not to interfere with the day-to-day business of the county administration, and I would encourage you to try to resolve this with your supervisor and the administrator. However, I did say, if you still don't feel like anything is being resolved, I would certainly be glad to sit down with you, your supervisor, and the county administrator. That way, you're not blocking them out, but then again, you're having an open mind and willing to sit and try and resolve an issue. Just my thoughts.
That's a good point. And a couple of years ago, you were on the board, Dave, when we did this, but we established a communications policy, internal communication policy, so that if employees have an issue, we want to make sure it's being dealt with appropriately through the chain of command, and so that the supervisor, department head, administrator or HR are not cut out of the loop. But we want to make sure that that the issue that is being brought forward is being dealt with in an appropriate way, and not ignoring employees. I can't, I don't prevent employees from speaking to board members or even department heads from speaking to board members. The only thing I ask is to be kept in the loop of communication and make sure that employees are getting directed to the right component of the organization to make sure that their problems or issues are being dealt with.
I want to
Any
go
other
back.
questions at all for Andy?
Scott.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
I want to go back to that one quote that you had, an unnamed quote, speaking about county boards. Or no, I shouldn't say county boards, it was boards in general. Speaking, from what my take was on that is that boards really serve not much function. And maybe I'm misinterpreting how that was written, but that's how I took it. Can you go into that?
Yeah, let me elaborate. I don't want to give the impression that boards don't serve a function. I think that boards serve probably the most important function within counties. The problem is that the devil's in the details. And so if you're a board that is reactive, that doesn't account for the distinction between policy-making role of the board and administrative role of administration, that you're going to spend a lot of time on trivial matters and not really accomplish what it is that a board needs to accomplish. And so the quote was really saying that if we add up all of the problems associated with a typical board, and it wasn't county boards, it was governmental, nonprofit, for-profit boards, just boards in general, is that people often get lost. And I think they get lost with good reason. I'll be honest. There's nobody that I see in front of me today that is doing this for the paycheck. I know you're not getting a big paycheck. You're not doing it for the money. You're doing it because you want to serve the people that elected you to serve St. Croix County. So a lot of people get on boards thinking, I've got to do something in order to feel like I'm accomplishing something to represent the best interest of the people that put me here. Well, unfortunately, that thought process leads to what I view to be a lot of micromanagement in the name of just trying to get things done. And so all I'm suggesting is that quote kind of highlights some of the issues that are inherent with board service throughout the country, frankly. And if we focus on, again, being proactive, being visionary, we're going to accomplish a heck of a lot more. We're going to get meaning out of this. And you're going to see that the constituents that you served are better served by focusing, again, on that long-range, strategic, visionary thought process. By the way, it was John Carver that said that, for anybody who's curious and is going to Google it. And Carver did an entire book series on board governance. So it was John Carver. I promised I wouldn't say his name, but I guess I do. I did.
Thanks again, Andy. I think we'll move on now to the open meeting law discussion. Andy, you're more than welcome to stay plugged into this unless you have other things to do for the assessment.
Well, I have this weird thing called the Supreme Court decision in Emergency Order 28 that I got to get to.
Yeah, we would probably like to talk to you about that as well.
Yeah, Scott, just so you know, Pat and Scott, there is a 4 o'clock call on that. I don't know if you saw the invite, but we're having a 4 o'clock call on that. So.
Okay, I'll try to be part of that.
So I will leave the meeting and bid you all farewell. Good luck. It was a pleasure meeting you all virtually today. I hope I get a chance to catch up with each and every one of you at some point in the future.
Yeah, Andy, I'd rather have you spend your time thinking about that court than then.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott and Heather, you're up.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to present today on open meetings law, and Ken is going to go through the PowerPoint slides for me. So basically, this is the policy set forth in Wisconsin Chapter 19, and it's the policy of Wisconsin that the public be entitled to the fullest and most complete information regarding the affairs of government as is compatible with the conduct of government business. So basically, we want to make sure that the public has the fullest access to government, including meetings, etc. So the open meetings law, which is found in Chapter 19, requires that all meetings of all state and local governmental bodies shall be publicly held in places reasonably accessible to members of the public and shall be open to all citizens at all times unless expressly provided by law, which we will get to later about closed sessions. And so when does this apply? It applies to every meeting of a governmental body. And so we need to construe these provisions to achieve the purpose of open government to all citizens. And so the definition of governmental body is set forth in Chapter 19, includes a state or local agency, board, commission, committee, council, department of public body, corporate, and politic created by the Constitution, statutes, ordinance, rules, or orders. And that is specifically found in Wisconsin Statute Chapter 19.82. So virtually any collective governmental entity, including those that are purely advisory, are governmental bodies under the statute. And so here in St. Croix County, the county board and the subcommittees are governmental bodies. So are entities like the CJCC, and those are all subject to the open meetings laws. So just recently in 2017, there was the case of Kruger versus Appleton Area School District Board of Education, which helped clarify the definition of governmental body. And after this decision, that St. Croix County did go through each of its committees and subcommittees and commissions to make sure that we were following the open meetings laws for all the various governmental bodies that we have here in St. Croix County. So the next slide gives the definition of meeting. And so the statute specifically indicates that a meeting is the convening of members of a governmental body for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities, authority, power, or duties delegated to or vested in the body. And so the powers and duties delegated to each of the governmental bodies in St. Croix County is set forth in the rules and bylaws, which I believe you have a copy of. And so to determine whether there is a meeting, there's case law from 1987, specifically the Showers case, which set forth the following test. So a meeting is when 1, there is a purpose to engage in governmental business, and 2, the number of members present is sufficient to determine the governmental body's course of action. So if half or more of the members of a governmental body are present, the meeting is rebuttably presumed to be for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities, authority, power, or duties delegated to or vested in the body. And so the next page goes on to explain the Showers test. So the first part of the Showers test is the purpose to engage in governmental business. So any formal or informal action on matters within the governmental body's realm of authority includes discussion, decision, or information gathering. So a good example of this is, let's say 3 or more county board supervisors that are on the same subcommittee end up being at a basketball game together, talking about basketball, different things like that. That's not the purpose to engage in governmental business. But if you're there and you're discussing items that are on the agenda for next week, that is a meeting where you're discussing actions that may be taken as part of the governmental body's realm of authority. So you don't want to do that. And the second part of the test is the number of members present. So the power to control the course of action is either affirmative, meaning to pass an action, or negative, meaning enough people to defeat the action. So there's a thing called the negative quorum, which is the number of members sufficient in size to defeat the course of action. So the one thing we need to be cautious of, especially in this day and age with COVID-19, is open meetings and technology. So telephone conferences, video conferencing, virtual meetings, chat rooms, instant messaging, it all can become a meeting if you have a certain number of county board supervisors that are on a subcommittee or a coalition or a commission. And email also can constitute a meeting. And so using features like reply all or forwarding, you could possibly be violating the open meetings law if you're discussing items that are set to be decided by the governmental body. You could have enough members on an email to create a quorum. So you'll often see that we will put do not reply all if we send an email to all the county board supervisors. So we are not violating the open meetings law. The next slide talks about a walking quorum. And what that is, it's a series of gatherings among separate groups of members, which each group is less than the quorum size, who agree to act uniformly in sufficient number to reach a quorum. And so walking quorums produce a predetermined outcome and may render publicly held meetings a mere formality. And so what we don't want to see happening is people, members of the county board, having discussions outside of the county boardroom or the subcommittee meetings about something that you're going to take an action on. Those conversations should be held at the meetings so that the public can hear what it is that you're discussing about certain topics. So if there is no tacit or express agreement, exchanges among separate groups of members may take place without violating the open meetings law. But you just want to be careful not to violate the open meetings law and have those discussions at the county board meetings. The next section is regarding notice. And so notice for any of the county board meetings or the subcommittee meetings or any other meeting that is subject to open meetings law, it has to be preceded by a public notice of at least 24 hours in advance of a meeting, unless there is good cause that such notice is impossible or impracticable. And in that case, it cannot be less than 2 hours notice. And I know at the county level, we really try to meet that 24 hours notice unless there is good cause to only provide the 2 hour notice. And the notice must provide time, date, place, subject matter of the meetings, including that intended for consideration and any contemplated closed session in a form that is reasonably likely to apprise members of the public and the news media thereof. So the notice needs to be specific enough so that the public and the media know what is going to be addressed at that meeting. It can't be vague and just contain one word on an agenda. It has to be reasonably specific so that the members of the public know what's going to be discussed and acted upon.
Sorry to interrupt, but just for an example, and I've been called on this myself, but administrator's report on the agenda, that's too vague, and I agree, because it does not inform the public of really the topic to be discussed.
And in the administrator's report or like the report of the department, that probably is specific enough only because no action is going to be specifically taken upon your report. And Scott can chime in if he thinks otherwise, but you're giving a report to the board about the topics that you want to address. The agenda could be more specific, but because it's not an action item, you're likely okay. Scott, you're on mute.
I actually take the view that in many cases, there should be more information with regard to a report. The person giving the report is in the best position to know what they're going to talk about in advance. And what they're going to talk about may not be actionable at that meeting, but could be subject to action at a further meeting. And so the open meetings law applies to both items that are actionable at that meeting or information gathering. So there's a split opinion about this, and there's, you know, it's sometimes difficult to know exactly what you're going to talk about in a report, but I advise to be more specific rather than more general. And that is the recommendation we provide to other department heads too.
Fred Johnson from the Department of Human Services often runs by the agendas through the Corp Council to make sure that the agenda items are specific enough. So it's always, I believe, helpful to be more detailed than less detailed if you know what your report is going to be about. And if a topic does come up that's not specifically noticed on an agenda, the governmental body should refrain from discussing that topic and put it on the agenda for the next meeting. And that's always good practice. The meeting should always be accessible to the public. And again, this is highly important during this COVID-19 pandemic, but all meetings shall be in publicly held places reasonably accessible to members of the public and should be open to all citizens. The open meetings law grants the citizens the right to tape, either videotape or video record on their cell phones or cameras, open meeting sessions, as long as they're not disruptive when they do so. And the open meetings law also permits a governmental body to set aside a portion of the meeting as public comment period. And you'll see that in the rules and bylaws that there is a public comment period at the beginning of each meeting of county board and the subcommittees. So there are times when the governmental body can go into closed session, and closed session means that the public is not allowed to sit in during closed session. There's 11 exemptions to the open meetings requirement that permit but don't require a government body to convene in closed session. And so I've listed the 11 there. I won't go through each one, but you must first convene in open session, and the agenda needs to be very specific for the reason why you're going into closed session. So the agenda item will say that the governmental body is going into closed session pursuant to the specific statutory section that contains the exemption. And so that will be specific in the agenda. So the public will know the main topic and the reason why the closed session is happening, but the public cannot sit in during the closed session. So in addition, the governmental body must pass by motion by majority vote to convene in closed session. So if the agenda indicates that the governmental body is going into closed session and a motion does not pass to go into closed session, then the body cannot go into closed session. Before voting, the chair must announce and record in open session the nature of the business to be discussed and the specific statutory exemption which is claimed to authorize the closed session. So the chair will recite that in the open meeting. And you need to set forth more than just the statute. It has to be the reason for going into closed session. And then after the closed session is over, any voting that takes place on the decisions would be held in open session unless that would compromise the need for the closed session. So in order to enforce the open meetings law, that can be done by either the Attorney General or the St. Croix County District Attorney. They both have the authority to enforce open meetings law. So the district attorney has authority to enforce the open meetings law only after an individual files a complaint with him or her. If the district attorney refuses to commence an open meetings law enforcement action or fails to act within 20 days, the individual who filed the complaint has the right to bring an action in the name of the state. And if it is found that the governmental body is in violation of the open meetings law, any action that was taken at that meeting may be held as void. So if any member of a governmental body attends a meeting knowingly violating the open meetings law, they could be subject to a forfeiture of between $25 and $300 for each violation, and also may be required to pay attorney's fees. One of the ways that you as a county board member can avoid liability is to factually prove that you relied in good faith and in an open and unconcealed manner on the advice of counsel, whose statutory duties include the rendering of legal opinions as to the actions of the body. So corporation counsel staff always recommend that you ask us if you have any questions about whether or not there was a violation of open meetings laws. Again, you can call us or email us, whichever way is easier for you to get a hold of us. We do have the main phone number on the last page of the presentation and our names available, and we do have county email addresses. So if you have any questions, you can ask them today, or you can always contact us and we can answer your questions after today.
As always, stellar, Heather. Any questions at all for either Scott or Heather?
Am I on?
You are, Judy.
I don't know if it's question one. I just want to verify that, let's say one of the committees goes into closed session, but another supervisor who is not on the committee can also attend the closed session. Is that correct or not?
That is correct. So there's a provision under Wisconsin law that if a subunit of the body goes into closed session, any of the members of the parent body can attend the closed session unless the body has a rule that would preclude that that non-committee member from attending. Now, so we don't have such a rules. So for example, the administration committee goes into closed session. Any member of the county board can attend that closed session.
Right, and just also letting them know that they are still under the same requirements to keep it private and confidential.
That is correct.
Yep.
And I just have one comment about voting in closed session. There are some that believe that you cannot vote in closed session, and that's based upon some dicta in one of the Supreme Court cases. But clearly you can vote in closed session if your vote compromises the reason you're in closed session. One example being, let's say the county's being sued by someone and you're talking settlement strategy with your counsel under 1985 1G, and you want to authorize your counsel to settle up to, let's say, $35,000. Well, you obviously don't say that in open session, and you don't authorize your counsel to do that in open session because that would compromise your litigation and bargaining strategies. So that's an example of a motion that can be made in closed session. Absolutely, that's permissible.
Other questions at all for either Heather or Scott?
Yeah, I have a question, Pat.
Go ahead, Rick.
I believe what I understand now, that if I was to ask you at a meeting what the county was looking at doing for business taxes because of all the COVID problems and business closures, that would be inappropriate, but I could ask for it to become on the future agenda. Is that right?
If you are you talking about in a committee, during a committee meeting, Rick?
Well, it really wouldn't be appropriate for me. I sit on transportation, but I think at the general board meeting, that's kind of what I was looking at. Because I sure don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I think it's something we ought to look at.
Well, I'll let Scott weigh in, but if it's an item on the agenda, it's you can discuss it thoroughly. If it's an item, we got into this at our last admin meeting. I mentioned that I was going to be bringing forward a discussion item, and we started, it was getting a little iffy. We started talking about it a little bit too much, and so we put the brakes on. We pumped the brakes and said, okay, we're going to agenda this item. We're getting, too far into it. So I think you have to be very careful. I do that in committee meetings. And that's where, we always have the agenda item, future agenda items at the end of our agendas. We have to just state the item. We can't start discussing that item on the, we have to agenda, put it on a future agenda. Don't start, picking it apart because it wasn't noticed properly.
Thank you very much.
More questions? No? Well, thank you, Scott.
Pat, I just have a comment about the negative quorum. And to give you an example of where you might be trapped unwaringly into an open meetings violation when it comes to a supermajority vote. When the county borrows money, it requires a 3/4 vote of the entire board. So in that instance, in order to vote that measure down, you need 5 negative votes. And so in that instance, the negative quorum would be 5 people acting in concert to agree to vote no to the measure. And so you want to be careful of those special votes where it's the negative amount is less than the half of the board. Just want the board members to be wary of that.
Scott, this is a question I have. Supervisor A calls Supervisor C and says, okay, we have this issue coming up on our agenda. You know, what do you think about it? You know, how are you going to vote? Yada, yada. Just discussions between, you know, 2 county board supervisors. What's your take on that?
I think it's permissible. I'm assuming this is a county board agenda. The problem comes in that when A talks to B, then B talks to C and D, and then A talks to F, I, H, I, J, then you're getting into the situation where you're getting close to a quorum. And so that's why we advise to, you know, avoid any unnecessary discussion, but it's permissible. If you're not in danger of reaching a quorum in your communication or a negative quorum.
But it could almost become and I don't want to beat this to death, but I mean, you say, well, you know, Supervisor A talked to Supervisor B, and then B talks to C, and then they were going, well, I think Supervisor A is going to support this idea, and it becomes like a communication chain.
Yes, it becomes a walking quorum, basically, where it's a series of gatherings among separate groups that they agree to vote one way or the other. So it could create the walking quorum situation. And again, like Scott says, we advise that, you know, limit those conversations to the county boardroom if possible, so you're not having those separate conversations between the members to predetermine whether an action will be taken or defeated.
I think all of you are familiar with the show Survivor, and when Assistant Corporation Counsel Liz Roll, who's not on this conference or teaching moment today, when she presented this a few years back, she likened walking quorum to Survivor, where individuals would meet one-on-one in kind of a chain to decide who were they going to vote off the island. Now, the county board doesn't vote anybody off the island, but they vote on matters where it could resemble the show Survivor. So don't do that. Don't be like Survivor.
Yeah, I don't want to get voted off the island, Scott. Okay, that was good. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you, Heather and Scott. I think we'll be hearing from you a little later on. Are we ready to move into the budget, Ken?
Of course we are.
Okay, you're going to be running the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, thanks. So I think Andy Phillips said the budget document is probably one of the most important policy documents that you as a county board will undertake. And we are annually required to adopt a budget. The County Board of Supervisors is required to adopt a budget annually and a tax levy that goes along with the budget. And so we annually go through a process, a schedule of a accumulating information and data, budget requests from all the various departments, and then Ken and I will sift through the budget requests. The committees will discuss the budget requests, and then I am responsible legally, statutorily, to present a budget to the county board for your input and then your final budget resolution. So this is looks like our table of contents for the budget. In May of this year, at our next administration committee, we'll be looking at budget guidelines for the 2021 budget. Here's a copy of the budget guidelines that were established a year ago in May. We looked at health insurance premium increases. We always look at if there are new position requests. We have a compensation grid for all county employees, and we try to abide by the compensation grid established and approved by the board, but it's wholly dependent on county resources and budget capacity to be able to do so. We also look at wellness initiatives and COLA adjustments over and above the compensation grid. In prior years, the board has allowed for a COLA adjustment in addition to moving steps on the pay grid. This year, in 2019, we did not approve a COLA adjustment to the wage grid because of our budget capacity didn't allow for that. And we also looked at step increases for both positions that were below market and above market. The county administrator has goals that are part of the budget approval process. These are the goals that are currently in place for the county administrator. We needed to follow up on the water quality study that was done a couple years ago. One of the recommendations of that study was to complete a nitrate source analysis. So community development department is in the process of completing that water resource analysis. The Health and Human Services Department is working on developing and implementing a regional crisis intervention services plan. We're making good progress. I had a report from Fred Johnson earlier today, and we've made great progress with that goal. We're also looking at completing and updating the mandated services report, which was completed a couple years ago. That report is in progress. We did implement the McGrath compensation pay grid as part of the budget approval process. We need to survey our employees to make sure that we're gathering good feedback from our employees regarding their employment experience here at St. Croix County. And then lastly, we had a goal for monitoring bed capacity at the St. Croix Health Center. And we did receive our long sought after Medicaid waiver this year or late last year. And that will allow for increased bed utilization at the health center. Now, several of these goals, or some of them, will be impacted by the pandemic crisis. And so I have not received a report from Sandy recently, but I will regarding our bed utilization at the health center, because we have been in lockdown. I don't know if that is having an impact on our census, but it very well could. We have a schedule in place. This is the schedule that was utilized for this year's budget. Ken, did you want to say a few words on that?
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, and thank you for putting the budget in the middle of the afternoon. We should really perk everyone up now.
It's exciting stuff.
It is exciting stuff. So the budget schedule, we're starting it now. So we start early in the year. It's a lot of background work that's being done now. We're getting all the KIP projects put together. We're getting all the background data put together. July, the department heads are going to start doing a lot of heavy lifting. They're going to be submitting all of their requests, telling us what they need. And then it sort of gets handed off to the county administrator and the standing committees to go through all of those requests and try to pare it down and fit the puzzle pieces together to come up with a balanced budget. We'll present that package to you in October of each year. We'll schedule a committee of the whole, and then we'll have the formal public hearing and adoption, hopefully then, of the budget at the November meeting, in time for us to get December tax bills out to everyone, because everyone loves those for Christmas. You're on mute, Pat.
Thank you, Ken. Here's our strategic planning pyramid. I refer to it. And if you see at the bottom of the pyramid, county board strategic initiatives, those initiatives were a byproduct or an outcome of the strategic planning session, which we held with the board last year. I won't read through those, but the board, through a series of discussions, developed 6 strategic initiatives that they wanted to see accomplished in 2019 and 2020. Those initiatives then become the goals of the county administrator, which I just outlined earlier in the previous slide. Those goals then become part of the budget development process. You see the budget guidelines, and then they become, once the board approves the budget in November, they become departmental work plans. And then I work with the department heads to make sure that we're accomplishing the goals and the initiatives that the board, that you as a board have identified. So sometimes we go through all these planning processes and strategic planning, and I'm sure some board members will wonder, well, what really becomes of that? What was the outcome of that? Well, we take it seriously and we develop goals, and that becomes part of our budget, and it becomes part of the departmental work plans. And so there is a method to our madness.
When we take a look at the county and we look at some of the statistical numbers that we have with St. Croix County, we're very fortunate. St. Croix County has been one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Wisconsin. Our equalized value last year was up 9.54%. The net new construction was 2.74%. So the net new construction is the new buildings that were in the county. That's really the more important of the two numbers, because that's what is tied to our revenue. So the revenue limitations by the state are on that net new construction number. The rest of the equalized value growth is the growth of the value of the county. So that means our properties are appreciating at a faster pace when you compare it to our other municipalities around the state. And you can see the trend line. You can see the economic dip in the housing market, very visible there in the early 2010 area. And then we're way back up over $10 billion in value now in the county. When you look at the population growth, we're not number one in the county like we were with net new construction last year, but we're in the top 5 for population growth in St. Croix County. So our population's growing, the value of our properties is growing, so we have a whole lot going for us. When I talk to our peers in other counties, they're jealous of what we have going on here. So, you should be happy of where you live.
Another thing that the county can be very proud of is our bond rating. This is similar to a credit rating, a credit score that we as individuals will have. Every municipality, including counties, have a bond rating. So when and if the board decides to issue debt for capital improvement projects, our bonds are rated, and we go through a pretty rigorous rating process where our finances are scrutinized by Moody's Investor Service, and they develop a bond rating which has a direct impact on our ability to secure low interest, financially competitive bonds. And so it's critically important, and we go through like I said, it's a pretty rigorous process, and we have a AA1 rating, which is the second highest possible rating for county municipal bonds. And so you can see the number of counties that 42 of the 72 counties which have been that show in this survey, we have a AA1, which is very, very strong.
When we talk about the debt that the county has, you can look at our debt schedule. So prior to 2014, all of those prior debts have been paid off. So only the debts from 2014 on are showing. They're going out through the year 2039. If you can see kind of in small letters there what those projects were for. So you can see the 2015 and 2016, those were large general obligation bond issues that were done for the health center. And then the next big one was the 2018A GO bond. That was done for the highway facility, and the one done last year, that was for the jail and government center renovation projects that are going on. But we keep a detailed schedule of all of our debt and payments that are being made on that. That'll be a component of the budget, so we keep track of that, and you can watch it very closely. We also have been working on our WIPFLI projections for the health center campus. When the county board decided that they were going to reconstruct that health center campus, we contracted WIPFLI to do some projections for us. Last year was actually the final year of their future projections. It was a 5-year projection. Last year was the 5th year of that. And we were watching where we were on that. Our one column got kind of cut off there with some of the data for the in the IQM2 page tabbing. But we stay very close actually with the projections when you look at the bottom line. So even though it took us so long to get qualified for the Medicare and Medicaid for the rest of the facility, we managed the cost side of it to match the revenue side of it. So we staffed to the census basically, how many beds were filled, and we staffed to that level. So we were able to keep the expenses down, and the bottom line then actually stayed fairly close to that 5-year projection.
I always want to throw in that Sandy is an incredible nursing home administrator, and the decision that she made with regard to the food service, which was now, what, 3 years ago? Maybe 4 years ago, was a very difficult decision in bringing in a contracted food service. It saved a lot of money. It was a very difficult decision because we lost quite a few county employees in doing that, but it could have been the difference between keeping and not keeping our nursing home. So I think Sandy Hackenmuller always deserves a nod of the head when we talk about these numbers and staffing, and under the leadership of Patrick Thompson. Incredible story right there.
Yep. Sandy does. She watches those numbers very, very closely. She knows where everything is being spent in that facility, and it's reflected then in the bottom line. So when we look at the health center campus on a cash flow basis for their operating expenses to the operating revenues they come in, they have been in the black the last couple of years. And everyone always says, well, that doesn't include the debt. It doesn't. The debt was taken out, though, by the county, and the health center campus is a service that we are providing to the county. And so that is accounted for separately. It's in that debt schedule that I showed you before, but not counted against their revenues.
These are some of the major revenue and expenditure sources that feed into the budget. It's not all inclusive, but it's some of the main drivers. So far on the left side, the revenue side, we look at our net new construction, which Ken explained. We look at growth in sales tax. If there will be some, just a forewarning that our 2021 budget, it's not going to look as rosy with sales tax, but we typically historically have had real strong sales tax in St. Croix County, and so that becomes a major revenue source that funds county operations. We look at our interest earnings. We did make some reductions in expenditures in highway. There was a HRA fund reduction and then other miscellaneous budget reductions or changes. So we have a revenue source of approximately 2.5 million. And then on the right side, we look at what are some of the major drivers for expenditures. Well, I mentioned the step increase, which is a compensation factor, the WRS, which is Wisconsin retirement. There was a rate change, so that becomes an expenditure. We updated the McGrath compensation plan. We had union contracts in law enforcement that we needed to take account for. We had health insurance, new positions, and then some other miscellaneous expenditures. And so those were some of the major revenue and expenditure drivers for the 2020 budget.
Yeah, we try to show you the budget in a couple of different formats. So we repeat some of the same information, but everyone learns it a little bit differently. So maybe the table chart, maybe showing you the numbers, how they changed from last year to this year. So you're seeing some of the same things. You're seeing the taxes and debt service increase is what rose the property taxes by $2 million. So you're not going to see the same increase in debt service going into 2021. Property taxes then again will be based upon that net new construction number. We'll find out August 15th what that number is. But those are the main drivers then that are going into our budget. We're also going to show you the budget in some charts. Some people like the chart concept of looking at how everything is divided up. So here we're looking at revenues, and you can see that property taxes are 35%, sales taxes are another 9%. Of the revenue sources that we have coming in, and then what the other revenue sources are that we have coming into the county. We'll look at that then compared to the individual departments. So each major division within the county has different types of revenue streams coming in. So HHS, when we look at that, so property taxes make up 31% for them. When you compare that to highway, where they have 40%. So everyone has slightly different, and then they have different amounts of state aids and charges for services. Obviously, the highway is charging for services for road reconstruction back to the state and to the townships, where HHS is charging back for the clientele that is using those services as part of their revenue stream. Public safety and general government then look vastly different than those two divisions. So under public safety, property taxes are supporting 95% of the revenue source for them. They really have very little revenue generation in law enforcement. And then general government, again, not a lot of additional revenue sources coming in, so they have 68% coverage by the property taxes. When we get to the expenses then, again, we'll look at the format of the expenses. It's sort of the same subset from a couple slides ago. We look at the different things that are happening there. Probably the one that probably takes a little bit of explanation is the debt service. So the extra debt service payment in 2019 was a motion on the county board floor to use some of the cash reserves to make extra advance payments on debt. So we paid off debt a little bit faster. There wasn't a drop in the debt. It was just an extra payment that was used in 2019. We'll also then look at the expenses in a chart format to see how those are distributed across all of the different divisions that we have. So Health and Human Services has 30% of the expenses, Highway has 17%, Public Safety at 14%. So when you think about those different department heads, when you think about the HHS Director covering 30%, the Highway Commissioner 17%, when you look at the whole budget, they have fairly large chunks. So those are some fairly important division heads that we have. And then we'll also look at expenses by categories. So salaries and benefits. So salaries are 37% and benefits are 15%. So that's half of your budget right there is in salaries and benefits. So when we look at how we can reduce expenses, this will give you sort of a categorical area of where we need to look. And again, nearly half of it is salaries and benefits. Debt service, we spend a lot of time thinking about debt service, but it's really 6% of our total budget. It's a small portion of the total piece.
This is a spreadsheet showing the new position requests that were part of the 2020 budget preparation. The various departments requested positions. Some positions were approved, others were not. Some positions were fully funded with tax levy dollars. A lot of the positions, several I should say, were Health and Human Services new position requests, which were funded with non-levy tax dollars, at least non-property tax levy dollars. They're funded through the state of Wisconsin, or in some cases federal government dollars. So we look at the funding source for positions before we make a recommendation to the county board as well. And then ultimately, my recommendations that I make become part of the budget submittal process. And this is a breakdown of the positions. There were 23 new positions, new FTEs. We actually reduced 4.5 positions through reorganization and other efforts. And so I think it was a net increase of around 19 new positions. And like I said, several were non-property tax levy funded, but nevertheless, they become an obligation for the county in terms of total FTEs.
We also talk at budget time about the benefits for the county employees because we saw that wages and benefits made up half of the budget for the county. So we want to make sure we go over and talk about the changes that are happening. Health insurance is one of the biggest pieces of that. The benefit piece, benefits were 15%. Health insurance is at least 10% of that, if not slightly higher than that 10%. So 10% of the entire budget is health insurance. So one of our largest drivers in the budget, and one of the things that's probably going up the fastest. So we had a 10% increase in our health insurance premiums last year, and we had also made some significant changes in reorganization of our co-pays, the out-of-pocket limits, telemedicine, office visit co-pays. So we're changing all those things, trying to make the health insurance plan more efficient and as cost-effective for the county and the employees as possible. We are always under pressure to look at that, and so this is sort of an ongoing thing, and we'll be looking at that again this summer for changes to the plan. St. Croix County has a self-funded health insurance plan, so we have a lot of control over that design in order to help manage those expenses.
Ken, can you go to the next slide first, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So here we boil it all down to what does this entire budget look like in terms of a tax levy? And so when we compare the 2019 to the 2020 proposed, this is what we recommended. So actually the budget has been so we have the operating levy, proposed levy, then we have to figure in the debt service levy. Then we have some special purpose levies for a total levy proposed of a little over $36 million. We have, how does that relate to how does that factor in, or how do we figure out the mill rate? We take that and we apply it towards the, to come up with a millage rate. It's a tax rate per 1,000 of equalized value. So then we come up with our operating levy of 2.8, and then the debt service levy, special purposes. So we have a mill rate of 3.51. Compare it to the prior year. We factor in the equalized value and the TIF districts. We show median home value and how then that millage rate translates in a county tax. Now, this is just a portion of your property tax bill, which you would see, I think in Andy Phillips' presentation, or the WCA presentation, they said on average, statewide, the county property tax is approximately 20% of the overall tax levy that you see as an individual homeowner property taxpayer. Now you can go back to the other slide, Ken. This is just a graph showing historically since 1974, excuse me, what the St. Croix County mill rate has done, and see it. There was a period in the beginning in 1990 where it was over, looks like about 5.5, and then it drops down, and then it went back up in the recession, 2008, 2009 period, it went back up, and then we've seen the last few years a kind of a gradual decline.
Yeah, back in those 1990s, there was the state law had a cap at $5.50, and so the county was at the cap back in the early 90s there. And then also on the equalized tax rate, this is on average for the whole county. So every tax bill is divided up on your local jurisdiction's equalized value or assessed value, whereas we apply it on an equalized value. So, you know, one municipality may show the county taxes going up, and the next municipality is going to show the taxes going down. On average, though, this is what it would look like. So when you see your individual tax bill, you told everyone their bill was going down, but it went up. There's an explanation for that. It's math.
And then a year ago, or over a year ago, when we started building the 2020 budget, we looked forward into our crystal ball, and we were saying, okay, well, you know, what should we be preparing for 2021? The only thing that we didn't know about was COVID-19. So COVID-19 will have a bearing on the 2021 budget as we move forward. It was not even dreamed of when we came up with these assumptions, and so the COVID-19 will throw some of these assumptions out of whack. But next week, when we meet with the administration committee, we will be discussing budget guidelines for 2021, and we will begin the process of building our budget. Given the uncertainties, it's going to be a challenge. It will be a very big challenge for us to develop the 2021 budget, but we will do the best job we can and give the county board some good recommendations. So that's it for our budget presentation, and I'm sure there's probably some questions.
Judy, anybody else, or can I talk?
Go ahead, Judy.
Go ahead, Judy.
I was wondering if you can give especially the new supervisors, a very brief, like 1 to 5 minutes synopsis of the fund balance, what it is, what it's there for, and why it's changed in the past 6 years.
Okay, we'll tag team a bit here with Ken and I. Several years ago, the board developed a fund balance policy. So if you look at our financial reports, and Ken can explain them in greater detail, but there's an undesignated fund balance reserve, which is it's a fund balance. It's a balance of what resources are available to the county. When you boil all our financial obligations out of what's required, what's left is a fund balance. And so the board very wisely several years ago established a fund balance policy or a fund balance reserve policy. It's approximately 35%, right, Ken, plus or minus 3%. And it's what the board has deemed as financially prudent to set aside as an undesignated fund reserve. And so we guard that very closely. We were up at around 40% when we built the 2020 budget, or maybe slightly less than that. And we supplant, we nourish that fund balance at the end of the year if we're under budget in terms of expenditures, or if we're over budget in terms of revenues. That those funds, those undesignated funds, then are applied to our fund balance, and that's how that grows. And it's crucial that we keep an eye on it and that we continue to try to nourish that fund balance, because it offsets the costs. It funds directly our capital improvement plan. And so it's critical, because we don't want a tax levy for capital improvement projects if we don't have to. We want to try to avoid that. And so our fund balance is we guard that very carefully, and we need to continue to do that, especially when we enter into uncertain economic times like we are currently faced with. We're not going to have sales tax this year that we historically have seen. We're just not going to. Our net new construction will probably still be strong, because that there's a year lag in that. And so I think we'll still see good net new construction growth, but our revenue stream is going to be curtailed. And so we have to be careful, but I'm going to let Ken talk a little bit.
No, I think you pretty much have it, unless there was a follow-up question on that. Any other questions then on the budget portion of the presentation today?
All right, thank you very much. We'll turn it back over to Scott and Heather. They're going to talk about Robert's Rules of Order.
All right, well, this is the exciting part of the meeting. Everything you wanted to know about parliamentary procedure and were afraid to ask. This is really just intended as a general overview. I'm not going to touch on every aspect, understanding that I got to be at a meeting at 4 o'clock and want to be a little prepared for that. So I'm just going to go through the basics. So the purpose of parliamentary procedure is to facilitate the smooth running of a meeting and to facilitate appropriate decision-making and to account for ways in which there are disputes as to procedure and how to resolve them. For many organizations, including St. Croix County, the treatise on parliamentary procedure is Robert's Rules of Order, which we've incorporated into our board rules here. And although we have some separate procedural rules, Roberts governs in all other aspects. There are certain things that parliamentary procedure or Roberts rules cannot supersede. One example would be the open meetings law. And although that most votes under Roberts is only requires a majority vote, there are certain votes under state law that require a supermajority vote. For example, when borrowing money or when the county is amending its previously adopted budget. Some general tips about decorum. You should avoid the use of a member's first name. And I think it's okay to use their last name in conjunction with their title supervisor. The presiding officer, the chair, should not be referred by their name. They should be referred to as Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. And like a professional athlete, the chair refers to himself in the third person, the chair. So I would avoid, once again, of first names and talking directly to one another, but by their title. So when can you speak at a meeting? When a member does not speak without first having addressed the chair and obtained the permission of the chair to speak. The person has to be formally recognized by the chair. When you're speaking at a meeting, although you may be commenting on another member's comment, you should be directing your comments to the chair and not that member. Next slide, duties of the chair. All persons at a meeting have an obligation to obey the presiding officer. In the instance of a county board, it's the chair of the county board committee, it's the chair of that committee. The chair should not tolerate using gamesmanship and obstructive use of the parliamentary rules. The chair is obligated to enforce the rules relating to debate, order, and decorum. And sometimes it happens that we might get a little off topic. It's the chair's duty to keep the board on task and to remind them to confine their remarks to the merits of the particular question. So when you're debating an issue before the board, the remarks have to pertain to the question before the assembly. The assembly, in this case, is the board. Speakers must maintain a courteous tone, avoid interjecting a personal tone into the debate, no matter how strongly you feel about a particular issue. One thing that I would like to note that's not always followed, but could be enforced by the new chair, is that a member only has a right to speak twice on the same question, and that a member can only speak no longer than 10 minutes in total. I've observed sometimes where members are allowed to speak 6 or 7 times. Strictly speaking, that's not allowed. My advice is to think strategically when you want to talk and perhaps not respond to each and every comment made by other board members during the debate. With regard to the chair's ability to speak on an issue, he or she is really not allowed to speak to the merits of an issue unless the chair relinquishes the chair, and which he hands over then to the vice chair to run the meeting regarding an issue. And in that case, the chair should not return until the pending question is disposed of. So the chair feels very strongly about an issue of relocating hiking trails. And the chair wants to speak, the chair has the right to speak, but the chair has the duty and obligation to stand down, become a member of the board common or the assembly, and turn the meeting over to the vice chair. And once the vote's over on the location of the hiking trails, the chair comes back to his or her original position. Now, the game changes with committees and small boards. So all of you are going to be a member of one or more committees or small boards, including the HHS board. There is no prohibition whatsoever in the chair speaking upon an issue or the chair making a motion regarding an issue or engaging in debate at a committee or small board. The way that business is brought before the county board is by motion, and more specifically, resolutions that have been vetted through the committee process. A motion is a formal proposal, and it's even more formal in our rules. A resolution is a formal proposal that's been vetted by the committee. The only one that brings business before the assembly is the main motion. So the main motion is what? You have a resolution to amend the budget to do something. That's the main motion. Many other parliamentary motions, including a motion to amend the main motion, can be made, but none of those bring the business before the board. And those resolutions tie in with the open meeting notice. They're required to be noticed. So you know in advance of a meeting what business the board is going to consider at a particular meeting. So in order to make a motion, you obtain the floor when no other question is pending and when business of the kind represented by the motion is in order. So in practical terms, you make the motion when it's sequentially on the agenda. Members must obtain the floor before making the motion and speaking in debate. At the county board level, if a motion is not before the body, a motion is not before the body until it's stated by the chair. And that's also true in the committee meeting. A motion can be prefaced by a few words of explanation. When the motions are before the county board in the form of a resolution, the resolution often contains a long explanations for the reasons why the committee is asking the board to take a particular action. The chair at any time may assist the member in framing the motion. The maker of the motion may not withdraw the motion once stated by the chair. It is property of the body. Discussion of any question is permitted only with reference to a pending question. Now that's true before the county board. So before a resolution or a main motion can be discussed before the county board, the motion has to be moved and seconded and recognized by the chair. Not true for a small committee or board. Committees and small boards, the HHS board, are free to discuss an issue before framing the main motion, because that's where the work is done in terms of generating what they're going to bring to the county board. So they may discuss without limitation an issue before finally making a motion regarding the topic. So in the board sense, when you're at the board meeting, county board meeting, no debate until the motion is before the board, or no debate. the maker of a motion can vote against the motion, but he can't speak against the motion. Board members will be recognized before the member. First of all, the board member who makes the motion is to be recognized first. And then no one from the board can speak a second time until everyone has had an opportunity to speak at least once. I'm going to get into some issues that I see regularly. One is to call the question. To call the question is a tactic to end debate. To call the question is out of order, and one member cannot demand that debate be ended. The proper motion is to close debate or move for the previous question. A second is required, and a 2/3 vote is required for its passage. Frequently, the chair will ask, are there any more comments? And are you ready for the question? That should be that's the last cue that a board member may have an opportunity to speak. Next, I want to talk about the issue of postponing versus tabling. A motion to table is really intended to postpone an issue temporarily at that meeting. So either because a more pressing issue is at hand or more information is needed to take up again later in that meeting. If you want to postpone a meeting or postpone an issue for a further meeting, the proper motion is to postpone to a definite time, stating the time specific date that you want the motion to be considered. This is entirely different than a motion to postpone indefinitely. A motion to postpone indefinitely kills, if passed, kills the issue. The issue's dead. Now, there's two reasons that you may want to make a motion to postpone indefinitely. First, you want to kill the issue, or you want to gauge the support of the particular issue at hand, and you can make a motion to see who's in support of the motion to postpone, and you may want to craft particular motions to amend the main motion to perhaps satisfy something that other members are seeking as well. I want to go through what the purpose of a point of order is. A point of order is when a member believes something incorrect is happening. It doesn't require a second, and there's no debate. So if you think the chair has done something wrong or something wrong is happening, you say, Mr. Chairman, I raise a point of order that something is happening is incorrect. The chair makes a ruling. The chair makes a ruling, and that ruling can be appealed. The appeal has to be, there has to be a second to that appeal, and the body can debate the merits of the appeal. If the chair is convinced that he's wrong, he can concede. If the chair doesn't concede, the body votes on the appeal. I want to cover the idea of motion ownership. After a motion is made and seconded, technically an amendment or withdrawal can only be by permission of the body. Now, there's a way to do this without taking a formal vote. And what I've seen is somebody makes a motion and they realize it's a bad idea. And the person says, Mr. Chair, I wish to withdraw my motion. And the chair can say, does anyone object to the withdrawal of the motion? So if there's unanimous consent, you don't need a vote to withdraw a motion. And the other thing about that I wanted to say about amendments or motions, there's no such thing as a friendly amendment. We encourage amendments to be made formally so that they're adopted for the record. The last thing I really want to talk about today is the rules for small boards or committees. You will spend probably at least half your time as a county board supervisor in small boards or committees. The rules are very informal. You can have discussion without a pending motion. There are no time limits. Issues can be debated without limitation. The chair can make a motion and participate in the discussion without relinquishing the chair. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about, I said that was, is the motion to adjourn. It's not required if you've completed all the things on your agenda. And even though you're complete, and I've never seen this, but 2/3 of the members of the board can refuse to adjourn even after you've completed your agenda. I don't know what you're doing, but that's contained within Robert's rules. You can adjourn at any time, even though you haven't completed all your business. That takes a majority vote. So the rules aren't complicated, and they're designed to facilitate efficient decision-making. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Very good. Questions?
I'd ask the chair for permission to speak.
Go ahead, Supervisor Hanson.
So, Mr. Cox, would you validate that you need to ask the chair for permission to speak?
Would I validate that?
Is that correct? We need to ask the chair for permission to speak at a formal meeting.
You do so by raising your hand and being recognized.
The other thing that's somewhat related to that is that when there's discussion amongst the board on a issue or topic, I think that we have to caution, or we have to be careful that we're not getting into a dialogue back and forth between county board supervisors, that comments should be focused to the chair. Isn't that correct, Scott?
That's correct. Yeah, even though you may be reacting to a comment of a fellow supervisor, you should be focusing your comment not to the TV screen, not to your fellow board member, but you should be directing your comment to the chair.
Thanks.
I think we're probably then ready to move on to the Cindy's portion, Pat.
All right, Cindy Campbell, County Clerk, is going to talk a little bit about the meeting portal, per diem and mileage reimbursement.
And this won't take long. I'm sure you're all familiar with the meeting portal by now. You've been out there. One thing I just wanted to point out, and on the screen, it shows where you can log in. If you're interested in receiving, I have some feedback here, receiving agendas from other committees that you're not a member of, you can log in, create your own login, sign up for those meetings. I don't know if you have the portal up, actual portal up. It's pretty simple to log in, and so if you're interested in doing that, I just wanted to point that out to you, that you can get meeting notices. Yeah, I'm not logged in, never mind. So you can register there. There's a point there that says that. So I just wanted to point that out if you're interested in getting other meeting notices, that you can log in there. So I don't know if anybody has questions about the meeting portal, anything. It's pretty clean website portal to go through. The other thing I'm just going to touch base on is per diem and mileage reimbursement. So board members and citizen members are entitled to receive per diem mileage and expense reimbursement for attendance at board, committee, subunit, and other governmental body assignment as assigned pursuant to the bylaws. So if you're at most meetings here or in Richmond or Baldwin, you are going to have a sign-in sheet. There's going to be some meetings that maybe you are assigned to, such as Bass Lake Rehab. There's no sign-in there. So what you would do is on the sign-in sheets, on the bottom portion of the committee sign-in sheets, there's a space where you can add other meetings that you've attended that wouldn't have a sign-in, so you get your per diem and mileage for that. And if you don't do that, I have an expense reimbursement form in my office. You can submit it that way. So you do receive $75 for the first meeting attended of the day. Any additional meeting that same day, another $25. And if you chair the meeting, the compensation for chairing is $25. The chair the county board chair receives a stipend of $750 per month, plus mileage, per diem, and expense reimbursement. The vice chair receives $300 per month, plus per diem, mileage, and expense reimbursement. And these amounts are all set by the board before. This can be addressed anytime before circulating nomination papers for the county supervisor positions. So you get mileage reimbursement. It's at the IRS rate, which is currently 57.5 cents per mile. Meal reimbursement, that's usually attendance for conference attendance. Hotel allowance, if that applies, that's not a lot goes on for county board supervisors that way, but you are entitled to that. And the other thing I just wanted to point out, if you were to attend a meeting that you're not a member of, you want it, you can always go to a meeting, but if you're going there for a reason and to receive per diem, you need authorization from either that committee chair or your county board chair. So, and if you're unable to attend a meeting, please contact your committee chair or board chair, if it's the board meeting, or myself. Otherwise, you'd be marked as unexcused for attendance. And that's all I have for that, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Cindy. Any questions at all for Cindy? All right. Mr. Chairman, that wraps up our presentation for this afternoon. I want to thank all the board members that have attended this afternoon. Your attention to our presentations is really appreciated by staff. As I said earlier, we're here to help make your experience on the board a good one. And we're all in this together. We're a team, and I look forward to working with all of you in the next 2 years. Take a look at your bylaws, your rules and bylaws. Look at those. The committee is going to discuss these next week and be bringing forward recommendations to the board at your next county board meeting for any changes to your rules and bylaws. So I know it's early on in your tenure, but read through them. If you have questions or suggestions for improvements, now's the time to bring those forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, any last questions, comments? I would like to get some feedback. It doesn't have to be today, but feedback from board members on what you liked about today's presentation, what you didn't like, because we're always trying to make improvements to the orientation session. We do this every 2 years, and we want to try to make it meaningful. So if you have comments, you want to shoot them to either Ken or myself. We won't take it personally. We'll try to take your suggestions and make improvements as we move forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Have a good afternoon.
Supervisor Fiedler.
Pat, I had one quick question for you. Are you planning a strategic planning session in the near term?
Good question. Yes, we are. We are in the process of looking at some proposals from some strategic planning experts and consultants that are going to try to help us working with staff and UW Extension to conduct strategic planning. COVID-19 has thrown a monkey wrench into our schedule because we wanted to get this going fairly soon. We don't want to wait too long because we would like to use some of the strategic planning to help build our 2021 budget. But I have to figure out what our schedule is going to look like going forward. The COVID-19 has really messed things up a bit. So, but yes, to answer your question, Bob, we have not forgotten that. It's important, and we are going to be doing it probably later spring, summer. So stay tuned.
Any final questions? This meeting's adjourned at 3:36.